Excellent. All righty. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome our speaker, Dr. Warren Farrell, who is a best-selling author, and just there's so much of his bio to read, it's even hard to choose what to talk about. Let's talk about some of the most important things with Warren's background. First of all, the name of his talk is Why the Boy Crisis Resides Where Dads Do Not Reside. And I'll read from his bio here. Dr. Farrell is the author of The Boy Crisis, which he co-authored with Dr. John Gray, or with John Gray. He has presented his causes and solutions worldwide, from the White House to the Norwegian Parliament. The Boy Crisis book inspired the Fatherhood Crisis Bill signed into law by Florida's Governor DeSantis in 2022. Dr. Farrell has been chosen by Financial Times as one of the world's top 100 thought leaders. His books are published in over 15 countries and 19 languages. They include the New York Times bestseller, Why Men Are the Way They Are, and the international bestseller, The Myth of Male Power. And just to add a personal note, I read that book in the 90s when it first came out, and it changed my life. So it's such an honor for me to be here with you, Warren, to have this chat, because that book is probably why I'm here today. That I read about 30 years ago. So
thank you. That's really wonderful, Mark. And you've just made such a contribution since then, and you do it in such a loving, caring way, which is exactly the hope that I've always had.
Excellent. One more note about Warren too. One thing that makes Warren's background unique, for those of you who might not know, he was on the board of NOW, National Organization for Women, in New York City in the 1970s. And that's something that people are surprised often to hear about Warren's background. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Warren. Welcome.
Thank you. Looking forward to doing that, and probably Mark and I have arranged to do this as a question answer. So Mark will be interviewing me, and then we'll be opening the floor to questions from anyone in the audience who would like to ask.
Great, thanks. So let's talk about the boy crisis. You know, I'm really struck too. Some of our great speakers we've had today, but we've heard, saving our sons. So it's like there's something wrong with our sons. We heard in Mark Perry's Breakout, he mentioned that the War Against Boys, that book, and then your book is The Boy Crisis. And so I know some of your early books were about men, but this one specifically has boy in the title. So could you talk about your decision just to write this book, and what was the inspiration to make a book about boys specifically rather than men?
Yes, I began to see that boys in all 63 of the largest developed nations were falling behind girls in every single academic subject, and especially in reading and writing, and no, it's not a surprise to most people that reading and writing are the two biggest predictors academically of success or failure. The biggest predictor of success or failure in life is postponed gratification. And so as I started to see this, I started to say, this is, I've been paying attention to women and I'm paying attention to girls' issues, but something very significant is happening to boys. And as I started to see that boys were much less likely to graduate from college and much more likely to drop out of high school, I knew enough about female and male interaction on the heterosexual level to know that very few women who are college graduates or high school graduates are interested and excited about dating dropouts. And the more that boys dropped out of high school, for example, a boy who drops out of high school has more than a 20% likelihood of being unemployed in college, in high school rather, unemployed during his 20s, during what would be normally college years. And so I then started to see that boys' male IQs were going down. Usually each generation has an increase of about 10 points in IQs, but boys' IQs were going down.
Wow,
I
I didn't
started to
know
see
that.
that
Okay.
their sperm count was going down. And so that has an impact on both, that has an impact on the next generation, the fertility and the healthiness of the next generation coming from boys' sperm counts. And then I started looking more deeply and seeing that, at the age of 9 rather, boys and girls have very rarely commit suicide. And when they do, they do it at about an equal level. But between the ages of 10 and 14, boys committed suicide at twice the rate of girls. And then between the ages of 15 and 19, at 4 times the rate of girls. And between the ages of 20 and 24, at almost over 5 times the rate of girls. And so I started to look at that and depression and saw that boys were, the depression, because girls mostly reported depression. We had measured depression by the female metrics, but when you added male ways of expressing depression and the potential of that leading to suicide, I was able to develop some 63 red flags of depression that were manifested by, and suicide that were manifested by boys and young men.
63? Wow,
63 red flags of
that's a lot.
depression.
Wow.
So for example, boys are far more likely to, if you ask a boy, do you feel that nobody loves you? And then you ask him, do you feel that nobody needs you? And then you ask him, do you feel that there's no hope of that changing?
Mm,
Do you feel that there's no, that if you did mention what was happening inside of you and that was bothering you and your depression and your suicidal tendencies, perhaps, if you mention that to a best friend, that your best friend would lose respect for you?
mm,
So these are different questions than are likely to come up for young women and girls. And so I was seeing that, so for example, in college, 75% of people who go to college counselors for a psychologists reporting suicidal ideations, 75% of them are female, but 75% of the people that actually commit suicide in college are male. And so I was beginning to see that, the addiction to both sexes play video games, but addiction to video games is far more common among boys.
And
They are,
do you know why that is, the video game addiction? Because that is a topic that parents talk about a lot. They're trying to decide, especially during COVID, right? Yeah, kids are home all the time. You want them to do something, and they're like, well, if I stay home and play video game, at least they're not going out and getting sick or something like that. And people were kind of stuck in their homes. But I was wondering, is that something we saw more of during COVID, and why is it that boys are more likely to feel that addiction?
yes, we did see even more of it from COVID, but even before COVID, the male propensity to play 15 hours or more of video games per week was much greater among boys than girls. And one of the things that is really important to avert video game addiction is doing things with boys. Boys who are playing basketball or playing with their father, roughhousing, having going out camping, having challenges, being played with and teased and connected and develop important bonds. Those help to avert video game addiction. As you know, Mark, there was a young man in my life, there was a young man who wrote me about 6, 8 months ago, saying that he had been addicted to video games and he didn't have a father, and he was living with his mother, and he got into a great deal of hostility with his mother. His mother couldn't handle him anymore. The mother passed him on to a grandmother and then aunts, none of whom had men in their lives, and he felt so so without a male role model, and without structure and without the boundary enforcement, that he began to drift into a video game addiction that was so deep that he told me that he felt that he actually identified more as a character in the video games
Wow.
than he saw himself as a human being. And so that led him to sort of this massive feeling of purposelessness that led him to getting involved with 4chan and 8chan. And 8chan is a group that tends toward fascist ideology.
Yeah,
But
some
what
of these
attracted was that
yeah, some of these online groups can pull people toward that extremism. Yeah.
absolutely. And he said that, he started to identify with Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini because they were strong men. They had structure. They had motivation. They were accomplishing things. They were making things happen. And so he began to feel that fascism and these strong men were what men that he idolized.
Mhm.
And so then in 8chan, that in that group that he was part of, two of the major mass shooters, like Nicholas Cruz, had that we all know of the names of, he sort of saw how much attention they were getting and how
Mhm.
they were able to express their anger. So he wrote up a 52-page manifesto explaining how he was going to organize his mass shooting and how he would be able to kill more people than had ever been killed before and so on.
Yeah.
And so, and then
Wow.
fortunately, he somehow or other, he ran across a book called my book, The Boy Crisis. And what was life-changing for him was not the data in the book, but rather just feeling that his story of being without a father and his loneliness and his isolation and his lack of structure and his lack of purpose, that he felt like I was a spy in his life. And that he felt for the first time in his life really seen, and that he wasn't so alone, because if I was able to identify this as happening with many boys without fathers, then obviously he wasn't alone. And that just feeling seen took the enough anger away. He still had a lot of anger, but took away enough anger that he no longer had the motivation to do the mass shooting. And so his note to me said, that thank you for saving my life, and thank you for the boy crisis also saving the life of all the people I would have managed to kill.
Wow.
And so this is really an example of the need for boys to have this sort of these different parenting styles that dads, as a rule, tend to bring to parenting of a child versus moms. And both moms and dads' parenting styles are very important as a contribution. Moms tend to protect a lot. Dads tend to sort of encourage more risk taking, encourage more teasing, encourage more roughhousing,
Mhm.
many things that are quite different. But dads are very bad at, well, the culture has been terrible to dads around the issue of informing dads that, for example, roughhousing done in dad style tends to children being more empathetic. I mean,
Mhm.
can you imagine a dad saying, I'd like to, roughhouse with my kids to help make them more empathetic? I mean, it's
Yeah.
so counterintuitive. And and of course,
So
we
when they've
can't.
been, so what you're saying is they're more empathetic because when they get sort of knocked around, like, oh, if I hit somebody, it hurts. So I don't want to hit them and because last time I got hit, it hurt. So I'm going to be careful when I hit the next person, that kind of thing, like when you're roughhousing, that kind of thing.
Almost there, but what actually seems to have the impact on the kids is when if somebody ends up crying, like mom feared right from the beginning would happen, and dad says, okay, what you did is you stuck your elbow in your sister's eye. So if you do that again, we're going to stop the roughhousing.
Mm.
And then the children do some version of that again. They're too aggressive versus assertive. And dad says, you were too aggressive. I told you before that that's if you do that, we'll stop the roughhousing. And then when the kids are warned and the kids do it a first time, dads tend to not repeat themselves. They
Mm.
tend to just stop the roughhousing.
Mm.
So the time after that, that dad says, if you can't be aggressive, you must be assertive. Here's what the difference is. Here's what's sticking your eye, making your brother or sister cry.
Yeah.
If you don't think of your brother and sister's needs, you're going to lose what you want, the roughhousing. That's the beginning of postponed gratification. The kid is saying to itself, okay, last time I treated my brother or sister too rough and
Mhm.
didn't consider their feelings and their fears. I ended up losing what I wanted, the
Mhm.
roughhousing. So empathy occurs when you make it um, to the child's advantage to think of somebody else's feelings. When
Yeah.
you just tell the child to think of your brothers and sisters' feelings, and then when they don't do that, you just tend to repeat it. That moms tend to do that. Moms tend to agree 100%. They want the child to be empathetic, but when the child is not empathetic or is too aggressive, moms tend to, as a rule, and sometimes this is reversed, moms tend to repeat, I told you not to be that way. Dads tend to just end the gift that they're giving them, end the bond that they're giving them. And that
Mm.
forces the children into thinking of others, to understanding the distinctions between being assertive and aggressive,
Mhm.
and having postponed gratification. So the kids then go to sort of accomplish something that they really want to accomplish, being a musician or a basketball player or something like that,
Yeah.
and or doing homework. And the kids have that postponed gratification to have the discipline to complete the homework or to to achieve their dream, they then feel better about themselves in school and from parents and brothers and sisters. And for guys who are, 12 years old, they 13, 14, 15 years of age, they start noticing very quickly that girls are very interested in winners. They're not at all interested in losers. And if they're a loser, they get, what comes with that is female rejection, not only sexual rejection, but long-term relationship rejection. And that leads to many boys withdrawing and becoming depressed, and in worst case scenarios, suicidal, and in super worst case scenarios, attracted to the mass shootings that we talked about.
Wow. You mentioned something interesting in that last comment, just about uh, fathers and mothers. One of the themes that we've been hearing today is just the importance of fatherhood. Another thing we've been hearing is it's been a little tough to get some of these messages out. Now, your book has been a great example. Some of the other people we've had today have been examples of the word starting to get out. But I think there's still some pushback that when you start talking about the importance of fatherhood and fathers in a child's life, particularly a boy's life, some people said you're being anti-single mother, or you're being,
Yes.
something, because there are a fair number of, moms who have primary custody or sole custody of their children. So how would you add, what would be your suggestion for bringing up these issues so that people don't get defensive, particularly if she's happens to be a single mom and you're trying to share these issues with her, and then you say, oh, they need their dad. She feels like, oh, she did something wrong, right? So
Yes.
how do you say it in such a way, or how do you bring these issues up in such a way as to keep the person engaged and to really hear the type of issues that we're talking about today?
First of all, I want to really verify that what you're saying is precisely true. As you know, I went out to interview both Republican presidential candidates about 8 years ago, and Democratic presidential candidates. And the presidential candidates like Andrew Yang and John Hickenlooper really said, wow, this really educates me. Andrew Yang was already well educated, and their campaign managers came up to me later and said, Dr. Farrell, we can start talking about the importance of fathers, because a good part of our base is single mothers. And we don't want single mothers to be to feel like they're being criticized as not doing a good enough job, that they need fathers. And my response to that was, we need every single mother that I dated between marriages had one word aside from love that she used with me, and that word was overwhelmed. And the other word, the second most used word, was guilty. She was overwhelmed by having to handle all the work of raising the children, and then all the work of working outside in the workplace. And the guilty part was that she often felt guilty that she wasn't spending enough time with the children and doing as good a job with the children as she felt she could. And she wasn't doing as good a job in the workplace as she felt she could. And she felt overwhelmed and stressed by trying to do it all. My message is saying that moms, single moms, you deserve dads to participate equally in the child raising process, so that you have time to, if you want to focus more on your work or focus more on the children and have some flexibility and have some relief from that stress. We need to ask dads to step up and participate equally in the process of raising children. And that the good news is we're empathizing with mom's overwhelm, and that has a very different take on translating dad involvement as, oh, you think I'm not good enough. Second, when we tell men they are needed, men step up. So for example, every generation has had its war. In each generation's war, we said, men, you're needed to fight in that war, and you're needed to be, you need to allow yourself to be disposable. Your life isn't worth as much as the life of the people around you. Will you step up, please, and fight so that Nazis don't take over or some enemy doesn't take over? When we've asked men in each generation's war to do that, men have responded by being told they're needed, to kill and be killed, with saying, yes, I'll do it. Now we need to tell men there are fewer men needed in war. Instead of being needed to kill and be killed, you men are needed to love and be loved. We need you to share the responsibility of raising children and to bring your different skill sets to the child raising process, because we know that the single biggest predictor of suicide is the father absence. The single biggest predictor of having a shorter life expectancy as measured by telomeres at the age of 9.5 is the lack of father involvement. The single
Wow.
biggest predictor in more than 70 metrics of child happiness, success, healthy development, includes father and mother involvement, and then checks and balances communication about the different ways that men and women tend to raise children. This is the solution to our children's happiness, in addition to laws being changed so that when there's a divorce, that children have equal opportunity to be both with their father and mother, rather than women having the right to children and men having to fight for children.
Great. And and along these lines, I want to take a quote from your book. This is page 196 from The Boy Crisis. And you wrote, uh, fortunately, lack of father involvement is a crisis with a solution. Father involvement. Eating sugar is also a problem with a solution. Eating no sugar. Sometimes doing the right thing is so within reach and so out of reach. So how do we make more father involvement more within reach? It seems like, again, as I mentioned, that's one of the themes of today, that father involvement is just so important for every child, for sure, and especially for boys. So what are the best ways as a society, be that, you know, personal choices or political, whichever direction you want to take it, what are the best things we can do to increase fatherhood involvement?
I think the first thing to do is not, the second thing to do is the political, but we have to understand why fathers are so important before we have the political desire to make a change. So, first of all, when I started doing the research for the boy crisis, I didn't see anything that was talking about how dads contribute differently to the child raising process. I mentioned the roughhousing example, a little while ago. Most mothers, they see the father starting to roughhouse and they go, oh my God, I know somebody's going to get hurt. And they're only about 99% likely to be right. But nobody explains the process that I explained before that leads to the empathy, the postponed gratification, the greater understanding of the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness, and how that manifests in being able to get more friends in school. If you understand the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness, more people will like you in school than if you go around being aggressive to everybody. And so you have more friends that develops a more positive spirit and less depression, less anxiety, less desire to withdraw into video games and so on. So so we as men have to, so I ended up, writing in the Boy Crisis book, many areas of, how dads tend to tease. When dads tend to tease with children at first, the children usually end up crying because they think that they're being criticized. And mom feels like, oh my God, you just made, Jimmy or Jane cry. That was, insensitive of you. And yet if you tease children too much, that can be damaging too. But not knowing how to be teased and how to be able to handle criticism through the modality of teasing, that oftentimes makes it go down sooner and smoother, and not be so rough on the child, is a very important tool for children to have up to a point. And it's a perfect area of what I call checks and balances communication, of the mother being involved and trusting that a certain amount of teasing and the child crying can be a very helpful learning experience if also done with love. And yet at the same time, if it goes too far, then that can be overdone. And children taking risks, like, mothers and fathers. Fathers will often encourage camping. And then,
Mhm.
if there's, let's say, a lake half a mile away, and it's during the daytime, the mother will tend to sort of like walk with the child to the lake. The father may let the child go considerably ahead. And if the father knows that if the child gets, quote, lost, they'll eventually find their way back. But that eventually find their way back scares the dickens out of the mother.
Mhm.
And yet it does help the child learn how to sort of navigate and take responsibility for what risk taking to occur. Same thing like with climbing a tree. Mom will tend to say, sweetie, I know you want to climb that tree, but maybe in a few years you can, but right now you're too young because you could fall out of the tree. Dads will say, well, you can climb the tree, but really be careful. And, when mom and dad do what I call checks and balance parenting, they can talk with each other about, okay, the child can climb the tree, but not beyond a certain point. And then you have to be under, dad, you have to be under that tree so that in case our son or daughter falls, you can cushion it. And by the way, let me have the cell phone. And so, so you don't get distracted. And so
Yeah.
those types of negotiations allow the child the best opportunities to climb the tree. What's the value of climbing the tree? Very few dads say, when our children climb the tree, their IQ increases. How does their IQ increases? Their synapses start developing and firing in a way because the child has to assess what's safe, what's not safe, what's going to get me hurt. And so different types of out of the normal routine synapses start firing that increases children's IQ. And so we have the data for this, but the data was never being talked about and so dads didn't have even if dads read parenting magazines, which few do, or parenting books, they weren't able to say to moms, I'm not only encouraging the child to climb the tree because something inside of me feels it'd be fun for the child to climb the tree, but that the child's assessment of risks will increase. We want that child to be able to increase his or her assessment of risk while they're young and around us and can be semi-protected by us, rather than waiting until we're no longer there to protect them, and then they don't know how to handle risks in their real life. So this is the dialogue that needs to occur between dads and moms. When dads have the courage to speak up about what their positive contributions are, moms will hear that this is not just sort of like dad being irresponsible, but dad being responsible, dad being thoughtful. And then more moms will want dads to be a part of the process.
Great. That's great. And I want to remind everyone in the session here, we've got about 15 minutes left, just a little more than 15 minutes. And so get your questions ready. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand. You can also put your questions in the chat, but we definitely would love to hear from people if you have any questions. I want to move on from the parenting issue for a second. Another thing you talked about in your book is the role of scouting type organizations and how important that is for boys too. So could you talk about how that is different and what maybe boys learn is different in something like that versus from their parents?
Absolutely. First of all, this is particularly important for a woman who's listening to this who is a single mother. And so the first thing you can do as a single mom to get dads involved is to understand what they contribute, why they're needed, and to let the biological dad know that you now understand what his value is. But if for some reason there's no way of getting the biological dad involved, understand if you have a stepfather, how to allow the stepfather not just to be an advisor, but to be an equal parent with you. If you don't have a stepfather or a biological father that can be involved, it's really important for you to know other resources. So, for example, the one that you were referring to is with scouting. If your son is younger, there's very good data to show that if a boy is involved in Cub Scouts for 2 years and attends consistently, that his character will increase, be more positive on about 6 levels of measurement, such as integrity and loyalty and responsibility, things that every mother that I've ever met wants their children to have more of. Second, Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts have deconstructed masculinity really well. Whether or not girls are involved has had very little impact on Boy Scouts are still the same basic structure for boys that they were before. And that structure includes merit badges. Boys not only love merit badges, but the merit badge allows the boy to have a sense of purpose. With that sense of purpose, there's usually in Boy Scouts a guide, somebody who's in charge of making sure that merit badge is accomplished correctly. And that creates a mentor for the boy in the area of his accomplishments. So you end up having your son have multiple mentors, and the deconstruction of masculinity is very well done because as boys achieve, let's say 5, they become a Star Scout, and they have more and more pride in themselves for doing that. Also, sports. Very few parents understand that there is what I call the liberal arts of sports, that boys and girls need to not only be involved with organized sports, which are very helpful for being able to have good mentorship and responsibility and knowing how to get along with other people, but also know how to do self-starting sports like gymnastics or tennis, where there's a greater emphasis on individual discipline, and also are encouraged to do pickup team sports, which are perfect preparations for being a great entrepreneur. If Mark and I meet and we've never met before, and you and I, Mark, negotiate, okay, should we play a full court or do we do half court? If you say to me, who can be chosen to work with us to make my side stronger versus your side stronger? Who on my side do I pass to that is just desire to always be the one to hog and shoot the shot versus who has only asked for the ball to be passed to him or her when they think they have a better shot. And so you start, each of the sports has a purpose, but also keep an eye out for good, strong male role models for a son that doesn't have a male role model. Keep an eye, pressure your school and encourage your school to hire more male teachers. Not only more male teachers, but different types of males to be teachers. I'm more of a nurturer, connector type of male, but your son needs not just men like me, but also men who are more traditional. So no matter who your son is, they have a choice of different types of males to be mentored by, and equal numbers of male teachers in elementary school and junior high school to female teachers. So there's dozens of things like this that are so important to really study the parts of the Boy Crisis book that sort of help a single mother know how to bring other male role models into her life. But I'd say the most important part is understanding how to construct a family dinner night so a family dinner night does not become a family dinner nightmare.
That, that sounds like a good name for maybe a Twilight Zone episode, Family Dinner Nightmare. But
Yeah,
anyway,
very
good point.
nice. Family dinner
And again,
nightmare.
we've got about 11 minutes left. If there's anyone have a question, make it known and we could ask it. I've got a few more here though while we're waiting. Trying to decide which one. But let me ask this. We live in a very divided country right now, unfortunately. And as for various reasons, we have political divide, we have sort of cultural divide. We're divided just on so many ways now. And it seems like despite the fact that information is kind of everywhere, people are kind of choosing their information and just sticking in their silos and see that other silo is horrible. And there's just finger pointing, and something that is so important as the well-being of our boys. How do we try to break that, or how do you deal with trying to reach everyone? Because boys should not be a partisan issue. Boys should be something, the well-being of boys who then become the men who are, make up roughly half of our society. Um, you know, could you just comment on any thoughts on how to bridge that divide? It just seems we're so divided today.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we really need to make teachers conscious of is how if we have in junior high school, we have a boy, we have a son, and he's hearing in junior high school that the future is female, that masculinity is toxic, that the toxic masculinity has emanated from male privilege. It's we're all living in a patriarchy in which men have made the rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And he's beginning to feel, and I hear this in real life all the time. I'm speaking in a little while to a Montessori school, and the Montessori school teacher reached out to me after reading The Boy Crisis and said, I have to say, I'm guilty of all these things that you talk about, just like the things I just mentioned. I have been talking about all of those things to my classroom, and this is a junior high school Montessori. teacher. And she said, it just didn't occur to me that, the patriarchy, so to speak, that we live in, did not incorporate males that made rules to benefit men at the expense of women, that registering males only for the draft at age 18 is not what I would like to have reversed and have my daughter do rather than my son. That men didn't make the rules to benefit men. They often made the rules to benefit women at the expense of their own lives, including that when children came along, they were willing to take jobs that they liked less, that paid more, so that children could have better schools to go to, like Montessori schools that that happen almost only. I see now by
Yeah.
when there's a father there earning significant amounts of money, so that as well as a mother, so that the children can afford to go to Montessori schools. And so, this was all sort of happening for her as she started looking at that differently. So that's one aspect. Number two is making sure that we really pressure our legislators that after divorce, that the children have an equal amount of time with father and mother after divorce. If the must do's, there's four must do's after divorce. Must do number, if you want children to grow up as almost as good as they would in an intact family. Number one is that equal amount of time with mom and dad. Number two is that children are not able to detect any bad mouthing from mom to dad or dad to mom.
Mhm.
Number three, that dad and mom live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other, so the children don't resent having to go to the other parent's home, but because they're missing a soccer practice or a birthday party of a friend. And number four, that there be significant, consistent couples communication or relationship counseling that the parents engage in, not just when there's an emergency. So those are one set. The other big thing is as you know, Mark, I've been doing couples communication workshops for the past 30 years, and I've integrated those into the method of conducting family dinner nights so they don't become family dinner nightmares. And one of the best ways of teaching your kids couples communication skills is by working on that part of the boy crisis book, that is teaching the family first how to get rid of electronics at the table one night a week when you do family dinner night. Number two, how to listen to your children and give them without interrupting them, without judgment in your eyes or in your body language, and let them know before you give a response to them. Let them know what you've heard them say. Ask them if there's anything that you've distorted. Ask them if there's anything you missed. When you open up that type of trust, ask them if there's anything that they want to add. And when they've done that and begin to feel safe to say whatever they want to say, because they know they'll be heard, you work with them doing that with their brothers and sisters, and you do it with each of the children. But then you don't stop there. You also avoid one of the biggest problems that often happens with empathetic parents. Empathetic parents are oftentimes very sensitive to their children's needs, but they don't require their children to be sensitive to their needs and to their perspectives, and to make sure that the children understand the parents' perspectives until the parents don't feel distorted, don't feel that there's anything the children have missed.
Mhm.
So empathy must be a two-way street, because every teacher will tell you that when she meets parents on a parent teacher night, and that many of her very empathetic children don't have parents that are that empathetic. They have parents that require the children to also be empathetic,
Mhm.
and that many children who are very that are very self-centered have parents that require things of them rather than just do things for them or are just listening to their needs. So all of these things, the importance of couples communication is important, not just for the male, the dad and the mom, to have checks and balance parenting, but also for the dad and mom to teach every person in the family to be able to hear each other, so that family dinner night becomes a place where everyone feels safe, not just some of the children feel safe.
Right. That's great. And we're about 5 minutes ago. We have a comment and a couple of questions here from our group. First of all, comment from Brad Leslie, gentlemen, capitalized. We are not raising boys, we are raising the next generation of men. The future of our society depends on them being at their best. So thank you for that comment, Brad. And yes, I mean, we have to have everyone for our society to be at its best. We have so many challenges. There's two questions, one from Dr. Charles Magwood and one from Sheldon Hess, and they're kind of similar. Dr. Charles Magwood asked, are there particular character traits that you would recommend emphasizing / prioritizing in the fundamental development of young boys? And then kind of related to that, what are your thoughts on helping boys to recognize their strengths or good personality traits?
Yes,
And actually, we're
really.
about 3 minutes total before we get kicked out at 3 minutes. So
All
we'll
right.
keep this one
Well,
pretty short.
I'll try to zero in.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, the first is see what is unique about your child. Everybody, historically speaking, boys had two senses of purpose: die in war and risk your life in the workplace to accomplish a lot. Now, for the first time in human history, we can say what is unique about our child's, where are our child's gifts? Are they singing? Are they playing basketball? Are they being a scholar, etc.? Second, once your child's gifts are identified with and your child is inspired by that gift, working to give that child postponed gratification, and which comes from boundary enforcement, making sure that if you're volunteering, for example, to take your child to gymnastics practice, and give your child a special tutor to become really top notch in his or her field, that child then doesn't just take those gifts that you give and not focus on accomplishing the ends and the dreams that child wants to create. Understand that every gift, if it's being able to be manifested as that unique gift of that child, is likely to be very fulfilling for the child. And the more fulfilling the work, the less likely it is to pay well. And so in order for your child to be able to do fulfilling work as an occupation, like being an artist or a writer, we hear words like starving artist for a reason, then that child has to have discipline to be at the top of the field.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Warren Farrell. It's been great speaking with you about your book, The Boy Crisis. And we're giving away a couple of these today. So back in the main session, you might be a lucky winner. And your talk today was called Why the Boy Crisis Resides, Where Dads Do Not Reside. We're just so grateful for spending your time with us. And thanks again for all that you've done.
I'm so grateful for your wonderful interview, your great questions, the way you care, Mark, and the way you've contributed. It's just a pleasure to be with you.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you back in the main room.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Warren. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Brad.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you. And you too.
We're going to win one day.
Drop me an email. Let me know more about it.